Welcome everyone to the virtual book club with Supervisor Ryan Coonerty. This afternoon, he'll be diving into Extreme Economies, 9 Lessons from the World's Limits by Richard Davies.
Hi and welcome. I'm Eric Howard. Oh, Sarah, we're gonna let you go through this slide.
Yeah, we have just a few housekeeping slides, and then I'll turn it over to Eric Howard, our Assistant Library Director, and our special guest, Supervisor Ryan Coonerty. This meeting is being recorded. Your microphone is muted for the entire presentation. You do not need a camera, microphone, or a screen if you only want to listen to the meeting, as this meeting is accessible by landline or mobile phone. To join this presentation using a telephone only, please dial any of the following numbers. I'll read just a couple of them off to you. 1-877-853-5247 or 1-833-548-0276. And then you'll need to slowly enter the webinar ID of 944-4784-3334, and then hit the pound sign or the number sign. Now, if you'd like to ask a question or comment on an item, if you're joining by a computer, you'll see a Q&A icon on the attendee control bar. By tapping on the icon, you'll be able to type your question or your comment. If you're using a mobile device, the Q&A icon might appear near the top of your mobile device. In the upper left corner, you'll see Leave Meeting in red letters. Then you'll see the ID number, and then you'll see that Q&A icon over to the right. And then once the presentation begins, if you're joining by a computer, in order to see both of the panelists, because we'll have Eric and Ryan for just a few minutes, you may need to use the Zoom control bar and select Gallery View. Or depending on the size of your mobile device screen, you may need to scroll over to view whomever's speaking. And then finally, if you're accessing this meeting via the web browser only, you won't see both panelists at one time, only the panelists speaking. And we'll transition over to our guest for today. Please stand by. Eric, over to you.
Okay, thank you very much, Sarah. I appreciate it. Hi, I'm Eric Howard, and welcome to our virtual program today. I'm the Assistant Director of Santa Cruz Public Libraries, and we are very pleased to welcome County Supervisor Ryan Coonerty for a special book discussion on Extreme Economies by Richard Davies. Ryan Coonerty serves as the 3rd District Supervisor for Santa Cruz County. The 3rd District stretches from 7th Avenue and Live Oak through the city of Santa Cruz and up the North Coast, including the communities of Davenport and Bonnie Doon. Elected to the Santa Cruz County Board of Supervisors in 2014 and re-elected in 2018, Ryan is a 2-time former mayor of the city of Santa Cruz. He is also an entrepreneur, author, and educator. He is the host of the podcast An Honorable Profession. He was the co-founder of Next Space Co-working Plus Innovation, a lecturer on law and government at UC Santa Cruz, and co-author of The Rise of the Naked Economy, How to Benefit from the Changing Workplace. And he also wrote Etched in Stone, Enduring Words from Our National Monuments. Ryan was selected by the Aspen Institute to be a Rodell Fellow in Public Leadership as one of the, quote, nation's most promising young elected officials. And he was named Community Hero by the Red Cross of Santa Cruz County and Advocate of the Year by the United Way of Santa Cruz County. I'm going to turn it over to Ryan in just a second, but I want to let everyone know that you can download this book and many others through our virtual library, and you can talk to a real staff person if you need assistance every day from 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. We also wish to remind you that if you enjoy this program, you may discover many more virtual programs like this one by visiting santacruzpl.org. And beginning this week, if you had a book on hold back in March, you will soon be receiving a call, if you haven't already, from our staff on how you can pick it up. And also, we are very pleased to announce that beginning in June, we will be providing more extensive curbside service to respond to new requests that you make through our library. And now I'd like to thank Ryan for choosing an excellent book that is extremely relevant to our times. Thank you, Ryan, for hosting today in our virtual library space.
Thank you, Eric. It's a pleasure being here. I want to thank Eric, Sarah, and the whole Santa Cruz Library team for organizing this. One of the big impacts of this pandemic has been sort of that loss of community, and to have an opportunity to engage with citizens. I'm sort of craving it, and I'm looking forward to it. People should feel free to ask any questions you want, both about the book, but just generally. This is a crazy time, and I want to welcome any questions. I also don't feel compelled to have read the book. I teach at UCSC, so I'm used to holding discussions where most people haven't done the reading. So just feel free to jump in with your thoughts. I thought I'd start with a quick overview of why I chose this book and why I think it's relevant to our time. But I really want to take this in a direction of wherever people want to take it and whatever they find interesting. So the book is Extreme Economies by Richard Davies. I actually read it before this pandemic. At the bookshop, which my sister runs, we get advanced copies of books that are forthcoming, and this is one of those books that was sitting in a pile, and I picked it up. Richard Davies is the former economics editor for The Economist. He teaches at the London School of Economics, where I got my master's degree. He was an advisor to the Chancellor for the Exchequer on economic policy issues. So he sort of has a academic perspective, he has a policy perspective. And then what surprised me most reading the book was he's really a travel writer at heart. He travels around the world to look at what we can learn from extreme economies. So these are places that are sort of not analyzed by traditional economic measures, nor do we talk about them much as economic units. Yet his argument is we can learn much, especially in today's age, from these extreme experiences. As I said, I read all this before the pandemic, and if you had told me back in January that we would have a 20 to 30% unemployment rate, be facing catastrophic economic consequences across our city and county, I wouldn't have believed it. So I'm glad I read it before then and wasn't reading it for what may become our economy, but instead was enjoying it. So he takes us to 9 sort of really interesting places. The first one is sort of survival economies, and he takes us to Aceh, Indonesia, which was an island community that was wiped out by the tsunami. It had 7,500 residents. The tsunami killed all but 400 of them. And he talks about how they were able to rebuild. And what was really interesting was that while there was international aid, it was actually largely bureaucratic and hard for people to access. And it was really an informal economy built on trust and trade that allowed those 400 people to rebuild their community and to really be thriving only a couple of years later. Next, he takes us to Zatan, Jordan, which is a refugee camp, and talks about the illicit economy there because refugee camps are sort of highly regulated and they aren't given cash. So they end up taking what is essentially aid money and then bartering those goods both within and outside their community. And following that economy was fascinating, and how actually vibrant it was, again, built on informal systems of trade and interest. Finally, he takes us into Angola prison in Louisiana, where obviously money and many goods are not allowed, yet they've developed an entire monetary system based on dots and these prepaid cards from the outside that are then traded like cash. I think the lesson from all this is that economies are much more resilient than we give them credit for. We tend to look at big numbers like the stock market, unemployment rates, but people, especially in survival situations, but in all situations, can develop networks that are pretty sophisticated and entrepreneurial, and that you have to respect as a government policymaker. You have to respect and try to appreciate them. The next chapter of the book is real failures of economic systems, and that's the Darien Gap in Panama, which is both under security, has security challenges and safety challenges, but also real environmental challenges as the rainforests are cut down. You have the Congo, which is rich in natural resources, but because of corruption, has failed to meet even the basic needs of most of its citizens. And then Glasgow, Scotland, which was the shipping capital of the world at a time when shipping was one of the main forms of transportation and ways to move goods and services around the world, but then sort of made the wrong bets, the wrong investments in both housing and shipping policy. Economic strategy were too rigid and then got passed by, and now has suffered for several generations with high unemployment, poverty, drug use, suicide, mental health, substance abuse issues. And so there were some lessons from that. The main one I took away from that was that too rigid of economic systems, or economic systems where there isn't trust and basic rules of fairness, eventually collapse under their own weight because people, because of greed and challenges, unless you can figure out a way to build rules where everyone is engaged and sees the end goals, you're going to run into a lot of problems. Finally, they have the future economies, where he goes to Akita, Japan, which is an aging society. Santa Cruz County, like the rest of the world, is aging rapidly, where our senior population is growing, I think, at 40% more than the rest of our population. That transforms economies, it transforms cities, it transforms social net services. And so looking at how Japan has tried, who's been on the front end of this, has tried to address it with some success and a bunch of failures, was a very interesting take. The next one was Estonia, which has adopted a very technologically based government. They are, it's on the forefront of getting e-services to everyone. This turns out to be amazing, as now that with many of our government services shut down or restricted by the pandemic, we are rapidly shifting at the county government level to putting many more services online, moving many of our workers to at-home or remote workplaces. And so this has been it's been accelerated, and there are a lot of lessons to learn from Estonia. And then finally is Santiago, Chile, which has had tremendous economic growth over the last 50 years. However, their inequality has also grown, and it looks at what happens when you have even successful economic growth, but without it being spread evenly or helping the less fortunate. And so in each one of these, there's a lot to learn. So I see we have some questions, and it says, and so the first question up is, I'm interested in more localism. I know there's an initiative towards public banking, and we have MBAP. Where else can the people, what else can the people own in the city of Santa Cruz, the county, and the region? What are the next steps? Well, let me first take a step back with Monterey Bay Community Power, which is, this is a, the people of Santa Cruz, through the initiative of a couple local leaders, have taken back our community power. We've doubled the amount of renewables at less cost. We will now be investing in more resilient systems and equity systems for people going forward with the additional funds that have been generated that were previously shipped off to PG&E. And so that's been the first one. I've been pushing really hard on trying to also look at public banking. There are some inherent costs, and the city and the county of Santa Cruz are not big enough to run a public bank on our own, but we could either partner to the north with the Santa Clara cities and counties on looking at a public bank, and I'm in touch with the elected officials there, or we can partner south if we can get Monterey County and San Benito County interested. We're looking at all those options and trying to figure out what we can do in order to keep more money here. The biggest single thing that we're going to have to look at is we're looking at the next 2 years, which will be absolutely devastating for many of our local businesses. And to the extent that we can all invest locally with our dollars in goods and services, keeping our money here will be allowing different companies to survive and thrive. And that's really one of the lessons of the book, is that it's informal, community-based economic systems that can have the biggest impact. So we'll continue to look for ways to create more resilience by having our local economy here. We have our next question, and thanks to everyone for participating, and feel free to send them all in. The author's premise that extremes can help us understand economics seems to work in engineering and possibly in microeconomics, but I question whether it's valid for macroeconomics. I think one of the big questions in all this is that he raises is, I do think you saw resilience at the micro level, and you saw some pretty big failures at the national level of governance and economic policy. I think one of the knocks that this book has had against us, and some of the reviews I've read, is that he doesn't offer a lot of prescription for this is what works and this isn't what works. He tries to take these economies as they are and see what we can learn from them, and recognize that you can have different outcomes in different situations. I think that's a valid approach, because often these large economic theories tend to have a hard time scaling, or they lock you into a particular approach as you have changing circumstances or other opportunities. And so I do think that one of the lessons that I took away as a policymaker is you need to have a basic policy framework that that sets out goals and creates fairness, but then allowing people to be creative in how they get there, allowing them to leverage their own networks and be entrepreneurial, not to be too prescriptive, is really important, because either people game the system. They had a tree planting system in Panama to try to reforest the rainforest, and because they were paying on a per tree but not prescribing what tree, you had a bunch of teak forests set up that then are harvested and have a negative environmental impact. Or in Glasgow, Scotland, you had a reliance on an old shipping model that people assumed would go into the future as other countries leapfrogged. So I think there is some lessons, but I do take the critique of Davies seriously, that it is a real that one of the lessons of this is that it's hard to set up a single macroeconomic theory. But I'd be interested in other people's takes as they if they read the book, and whether they found it interesting or helpful or applicable to our situation. If anyone wants to jump in with any Q&A, I welcome it. One of the scary things is, as they talked about the future economies, that aging economies, we've gotten a number of reports, and California is aging even faster than the rest of the state, which is aging very quickly. And it creates enormous challenges on our system, and we have to really rethink things. Obviously, we see the inequality in our own society and our own community in really fundamental ways. We're looking at a potential summer where we're going to have as many as a third of our children in this community not having access to food, enough food. And so I think, you know, when we look at Santiago, Chile, they're more extreme, but what we can do as a nation or a community to try to reduce those extremes is really important. We got a couple more questions, and Bob writes in, "Hi Ryan, what's your position on the redistribution of wealth?" And so I think that's a big question, and it all really depends on the details. I do believe you should have a progressive tax policy. I see it locally and nationally, where our government infrastructure allows people to succeed in business. And I think obviously that's a great thing. But we also have to make sure that we're investing in opportunity for everyone that's really with an equitable point of view, meaning that recognizing that some people start on third base and some people start very much behind, and trying to give people opportunity. And we've seen it make this country strong, whether Social Security that allowed seniors to go from the poorest parts of our community into one of the wealthier segments, to the GI Bill, to different Pell Grants, and creating opportunity for higher education. It's really essential that we make the investment in resources. And one of the challenges that we're seeing in this pandemic is it's further creating the divides between people who are deemed essential and are having to go to work and take risks, and those who aren't. And yet people are making not enough to live in this community. And so it's a real challenge going forward. What are we looking at? Another question is, what are we looking at here in the county for the immediate future of our economy? So this is, it changes, and this has been the challenges of the pandemic, because it's really going to depend on how quickly we develop tracking and tracing for that to then reach the next stage of opening. And then it's a question of how much the disease spreads and whether we have a second flare up, and then also whether there's a vaccine. I think we're looking at 2 very difficult years coming up. We are an economy that's based on tourism, and that will without a doubt be impacted this year and into next. We're also an economy that relies on higher education. That will be impacted for the remaining of the year and well into next. And finally, Santa Cruz, I think one of the reasons so many of us live here is the sort of sense of community, whether it's community events like the little ones like the Greek Festival or the different snow night downtown, or yoga classes or dance classes, all the ways that we come to playing volleyball on the beach, or the ukulele folks, all the ways that we come together, it's going to be challenged for quite a while. And that's going to have both an impact on our quality of life and so many small businesses that are running, that engage. They put on concerts or races or events, or they hold health and wellness classes. All those folks are going to be in a lot of trouble for the next year. I'm working with the city and the county to try to figure out how we do investments to help those businesses, which I think are fundamentally sound and will emerge if they can survive in 2 years or 18 months. They'll emerge okay, but we have to figure out how to get them going forward. It's a real challenge, and we're just trying now to figure it out. Obviously, the city and the county budgets will also be dramatically impacted, so it's going to make it, in many ways, we'll have less tools than we did going forward. So off topic a little, while you're here, this pandemic has perhaps accelerated the future of retail and its demise in some cases. Could the overabundance of retail space translate into housing? Have we heard anything on that? I mean, I do think it's a real challenge for retail, and my sister's business, Bookshop, has been operating, doing curbside pickup and home delivery. My wife's business of Del Williams, started by her great-grandfather, has been closed. So I'm living the experience. I think there's probably some opportunity. My guess is that the bigger opportunity will be more and more companies will be encouraging people to work from home. And so we could look at an overabundance of commercial office space that we weren't expecting. And some of those commercial office spaces could be shifted into housing. The retail spaces, I think, are probably harder to shift into housing just from a design point of view and a rezoning point of view. But I do think we're going to have to figure something out going forward. I am encouraging both the city and the county. We're going to have to think about new ways to facilitate retail and the activation of the spaces. So whether it's working with the Arts Council to get more artists on display, allowing more pop-up shops without a lot of regulatory barriers where people can go in and on a seasonal basis or on another basis, go in and take, a couple hundred square feet or a couple thousand square feet and really set up and activate the space. I think the city and the county are gonna have to be a lot more flexible in working with retailers to allow them to survive. Sylvia asked, the pandemic has accelerated shelter and services to people without stable housing. Community attitudes seem to be shifting, more supportive. How will we make those resources permanent, and how? Yeah, we've been working on trying to create a safe shelter for people and socially distanced shelter. I'm not sure community attitudes are shifting. I think in general, people have always supported it. They just haven't wanted it in their neighborhood. And so I think that by and large continues. I do think there's an opportunity that we were working on prior to the pandemic with focused strategies, doing a real assessment of all of our provision of homeless services, looking where the gaps are, looking what we're doing well, and a small investment could continue. We'll continue to do that. The biggest challenge we're going to face is there'll be bigger cuts to homeless services from both the state and local governments as our tax dollars have dried up. So at the moment where we can try to make some of these investments, and right now we're making these investments with some state dollars and hopefully FEMA dollars that will be reimbursed, those dollars will diminish and we'll have less dollars than we even had 6 months ago. So that's going to be the big challenge going forward. We're going to have to look at new and creative ways to provide housing and shelter for people experiencing homelessness. So can we have a question from Petra. Can we close Pacific Avenue to cars and have the restaurant seating with social distancing like Oakland? So I'm not on the city council, but I have been talking to the city and I believe that they are going to work on expanding sidewalk seating. And we already had the parklet program where you have several restaurants who've taken parking spaces and turned them into additional seating. I believe the city's working on doing that, and that will allow restaurants to increase capacity. I also think it'll be great because it'll really enliven, I think, the sidewalks and give people a good experience when they're entering a public space, but also give people distance so that they feel comfortable. So the city is working on that right now. I think it's going to be critical for our local restaurants to be able to continue to operate, is to have that additional space. And a second part of that question was, and I see Santa Cruz County, tons of people working on Highway 1 at every other exit at night as I drive home. Thanks for putting people to work. Yeah, one of the good parts, it's a story that hasn't been told locally, I think, as much as both the city and the county have, we over the past couple of years developed significant reserves, some of the best in the state, of almost 10% of our operating budget. And that's helping cushion the blow a little bit as we lose these revenues, but it also allows us to bond at really low rates. I think we just bonded for a number of county projects at like 2.75%. That saves taxpayers dollars, millions and millions of dollars. It also allows us to do more work for less money. And so I think now that we can do some the street work that the good people of Santa Cruz County approved in the previous elections, I think it can be a real opportunity. Are there any other questions that people would like to talk about? The book scratches, thank you, Keith, for jumping in. The book scratches the surface about how corruption affects the economy. The book also suggests that too restrictive regulations hurt the market. how can we guarantee a fair economy but keep it growing? Well, I think, Keith, you've done an excellent job of assessing what it is. Yeah, I think corruption or the loss, I mean, this is, I think, one of the fundamental things that we're looking at is we are not only facing the challenges of pandemics, but with the challenges of climate change, the challenges of economic disruption. And the big question that societies will have to answer or will have to engage in order to survive is resilience. And the question of resilience, people have focused on it from an environmental point of view in terms of seawalls or adaptive reuse or other things. Fundamental to this book and all the things that I've been reading about lately as we sort of look at this issue is the idea of trust. And unless a society trusts both their governments and their institutions as well as each other, economic activity really ceases to exist. And so figuring out how we build social capital across our community, build connections among people and between people is really essential. And I think that is that's going to be the differentiating factor for societies as we face all these challenges going forward. And corruption, as everyone says, really undermines trust. And so you have to be very much protective of that. And growth is important, but it really has to be inclusive growth. It has to work its way down. Otherwise, you have people have a sense that they're being left out and left behind. And certainly, I think our election in 2016 and our election in 2020 nationally will be about that and how we address that sense. It's a real challenge going forward. So Sylvia asked, do I think the administration will try to restrict mail voting? Do you have a sense of the difference, what difference mostly mail-in voting will have on turnout? I think that the administration and various Republican governors or legislators will do their best, especially in swing states, to restrict mail-in ballots. The studies I've read actually show that it doesn't, mail-in ballots doesn't help one side or the other. It doesn't really move the needle. It does make it easier for people to participate. And then when I went to college up in Oregon, they have all mail ballots. And while you see some increase in voting, you actually doesn't necessarily drive a much bigger turnout. So it's going to be an interesting election because I think the campaign is obviously going to be very different than it otherwise would have been. We're also in a highly polarized world. So it's hard to figure out what November is going to look like. There will be all kinds of efforts to take people off voter rolls, to intimidate them out of voting, to have misinformation. It's going to be a scary time for our democracy. I'm hoping that the courts will play a positive role. I'm hoping that, as we saw in Wisconsin, that when people see that their vote is trying to be limited, that they push back and send a message that if you, regardless of the position you have, if you try to limit people's ability to participate, you shouldn't. There should be a consequence for that politically. And so I'm hoping we move in that direction, but it's a scary time. So we have a question. There are many mom and pop places like to go, and they told me this weekend they didn't qualify for loans. They didn't need to pay back because they don't have any employees. It's just a husband and wife. Santa Cruz County looking to help those really small micro businesses all. Seems like we didn't help the extremely small business owner. Even the county could provide such relief as a very small gestures, masks and hand sanitizers to help with additional associated costs of keeping customers safe. They are gems, and it'd be a pity to lose them. Yeah, one of the incredibly frustrating aspects of all this has been the way the federal loans have been rolled out, and how, speaking to the earlier points about trust, they've been rolled out, and you had large banks the national banks really steering money towards their wealthiest customers or the wealthiest corporations that didn't necessarily need them. And it's incredibly, it's disheartening, and it's been frustrating. I will say that in the story of COVID-19, Santa Cruz County Bank and Bay Federal have been heroic in the efforts they've made to give out both the federal loans and then local business loans to help small businesses get through. The city of Santa Cruz also came out with a micro lending program. The county didn't have the same revenue stream to draw from to do it, but we're looking at what we can do to help people, including, I mean, we passed an eviction moratorium on both residential and commercial tenants, trying to help those small folks. And then we are partnering with Small Business Development Center, helping people develop signage or getting access to shared resources. I think the person who asked the question is exactly right. We're going to have to look at creative ways to help these folks. We are facing a massive budget deficit as the hotel tax has disappeared, our sales tax is way down, property tax, and then the state and federal dollars will be cut back. So it makes it hard because we won't have the same amount of money to lend. But we're trying to figure out everything we can do to help these mom and pop businesses, because you're right, it's a very scary time. And so we're looking at partnerships with the Community Foundation, with our local financial institutions, with the cities and the counties, trying to figure out what we can do. Those of you on the call who are been around Santa Cruz long enough, I think that this is a far more difficult situation than we faced for the earthquake. The earthquake, you had access to additional resources, whereas now we're looking at less resources. The damage during the earthquake was on a very focused area. Now we're looking at widespread economic damage across. It's going to be an extremely, extremely challenging time. We had redevelopment agencies after the earthquake that helped us rebuild and invest in local businesses. The state of California has taken away that authority. It's going to be a very, very difficult 18 months trying to work together. But going back to the lessons of the book, one of the things that I appreciate is that Santa Cruz County already in this pandemic and historically, we have high levels of social capital. People here really care about each other. It's a small enough county that many people know each other, or there's only 1 or 2 degrees of separation. But we're a big enough county that we have access to resources. So while it's a scary time, I've also just watching the groups come together and people help each other, whether it's Ride Out the Wave, or there's this new group on Facebook that's helping people recover, or the Second Harvest Food Bank, or the meals, the Heroes Meals. There's just so many great ways that this community has always come together and helped each other. And I think it's going to happen now, and it's going to happen again. And it's going to be it's going to be the differentiator for us versus a lot of other communities that may never recover. And so I'm grateful that we have, that we do have that sense of community here, that sense of trust and shared purpose. And as we watch it collapse at the national level, to know that we have it here is one of the reasons that makes me so happy to have the opportunity to grow up here, raise my kids here now, and serve in elected office here, because the people in this community are really extraordinary. So somebody just asked me, what's the group on Facebook? That's a really good question. I'm trying to remember it. Let me see if I can figure this out while I talk. But there are so many great ways. I should mention one of the programs that we're running that I hope people will take an opportunity. If they know anyone, we have a Great Plates program. This gives food for local seniors. If you're 65 years old, or if you're 60 and have a medical condition, if your income is under $75,000 or 100,000 if you have 2 people. We can get you up to 3 meals a day for people in your family, and it's from local restaurants. So you're helping a local business owner stay in business. So if you know of any seniors who might qualify, please make sure they sign up, and they sign up this week. We're trying to get as many seniors signed up so that we can then get them paired up with local restaurants. And if you just look up Great Plates, Santa Cruz County, you can find that opportunity. As I've gone online here, it's called Help Santa Cruz Families, and it's on Facebook. And every day in my feed, I'm watching people figure out how to give, even when they don't have a lot of resources, figure out ways to help each other. And it's incredibly inspiring, and it's one of these organic things that's happened. So if you go to Facebook and look up Help Santa Cruz Families, it's one of many, many efforts that I think is doing incredible work, helping people in their community, and it's really a testament to the strength of our Santa Cruz community and the way that people care about each other. Are there any other questions people might have? I'd be interested if anyone did read the book, if they'd recommend it. And if you haven't read the book, I really would say he really weaves in economic theory, so you get a good economics lesson. But in many ways, it's one of the most interesting travel books I've read, where you're getting because he actually went to these communities, so you get a sense of what it's like in a refugee camp. You get a sense of what it's like in the Congo, and what it's like on an Indonesian island that's just been decimated by a tsunami. He's a vivid writer, so getting that sense is really it's really worth the read, because it's probably the most entertaining way to learn economics there possibly is.
Ryan, hi. I was just going to jump in there too, and just suggest, if you haven't read it yet, you can see a free sample on our website, and it gives you more than a chapter, so that you can begin to sink your teeth into it, and then you get it for free if you want to download it. And I was just going to add too, just looking at the example from Indonesia, where you have from that region over 250,000 people that were killed from the tsunami, and 5 million homes were washed away. It's kind of incomprehensible how a tragedy like that people can come out from that tragedy. And I think the kind of the glimmer of hope from some of these examples is that they came out stronger. And as you were saying, they were really looking at the human capital, the social capital. And in the example from Indonesia, they doubled down on building skills, and that was one of the things that they helped them to come back stronger. And as you're saying, though, we're facing these economic hardships without too many resources. Kind of, since it is it's not just a localized problem, but is now a globalized problem. How do you see us in the future potentially continuing to strengthen people's skills?
Yeah, well, I think that's a really good question, and I think the idea is, can we partner with people up together? My favorite program that I've done at the county, and I will be fighting for in this budget coming up, is a nurse family partnership program, where we pair up first-time low-income moms with public health nurses for weekly home visits from the time they find out they're pregnant until the child turns 2. And those nurses not only engage in health policy, but they also engage in helping the mom access CalFresh benefits, or sign up for Cabrillo, or get their GED, or access a job, help them find the resources they need. And it's that sort of partnership, because those public health nurses are wired into the rest of our community, that I think is really important. When I look at the future of our homeless policies, it's really going to be strengthening our case management program, so that the people we pair up people who are experiencing homelessness with case managers who can help both be housing navigators, career counselors, navigate substance abuse and mental health services. And those partnerships are amazing. In the Nurse Family Partnership Program, we found that the Nurse Family Partnership Program in studies around the world, other communities have had this all longer than we have. You see a 50% reduction in that child going to the emergency room in those first couple years of life. But you also see the mom earning more. You see a 70% less likelihood that that child ends up in the juvenile justice system, and 80% more likelihood that that child ends up in college, completing college. And you can see how these small interventions that are people-based and connection-based early on can have these lasting impacts. And so even in these budget times, and we're getting ready to look at our budget, and it's going to be rough, I'm going to do everything I can to continue to nurture these contacts and going forward. And you know, that's one program in the county for first-time low-income moms. We have other programs for the streets team, where homeless people find community amongst each other as they're going out and cleaning our community and getting job skills and training. But it's really that sense of community that's the most valuable aspect of it. As Keith mentioned in the comments here, you know, we have an aging community. Can we find ways to connect seniors to other seniors or to younger individuals? I think one of the biggest challenges we will continue to have is a housing challenge. I've tried to figure out a way that we can make it easy for seniors to build accessory dwelling units or granny units in their households so that they can have both a reliable source of income, but potentially help a caregiver or a friend find an more affordable place to live and keep that connection to the outside world. I think that's incredibly important going forward. And so we're trying to really, I think underlying, and it's hard because in general, policymakers don't look at these sort of informal connections, but as Davies makes the point in the book, or as we've looked at, I think it's really important that we continue to build trust. We have a couple more comments. So Patty says, I did read the book and I'm relatively new to Santa Cruz. I saw the book as a mirror of the issues of our own economies. On the note that UCSC, our Estonia, and how can we better leverage the asset soon up being an Akita or Chile? I think, yeah, I mean, I think UCSC is an extraordinary asset to this community. And the work that they're doing in the genomics or marine research is really world-class. And we've seen this in this pandemic where they've turned a lab over into testing for COVID. And because of that expanded capacity and the research going on up there, our county will be able to open up sooner than other counties will because we have that expanded capacity. There are always issues between town and gown in terms of housing and traffic and water, quality of life, and we're negotiating those as we speak. But that asset, I think, is a major effort in terms of trying to meet some of the needs in this community, both immediate in terms of COVID testing, but also long terms in terms of inclusive economic growth and good opportunities. Irene says, seems like it was the less planned economies that fared better. As an elected official, do you feel comfortable stepping back to some extent and watching to see what works and what doesn't? Irene, that's a brilliant observation, because that's the challenge. The short answer is I do, and it's a new way, I think, that Santa Cruz County has to look at it. I think one of the things we did is we made a lot of really, really prescriptive rules for the rural areas about what people can build and what people can't build and the process they have to go through. I think the net result is that we have an enormous amount of illegal building going on, and people felt that the rules were not fair or too expensive, too complex, and they left the system. And so that we'd be much better off figuring out a way to be more flexible and encourage more people into the system. But then that does mean that we're going to be less prescriptive. And so I think that is the challenge. And I also think it's the same thing I'm talking about with pop-up shops. Generally, we have a lot of rules for restaurants and retail that want to come in. The fees are significant and impactful. And I think if we're going to survive this pandemic and the impacts that our small businesses are having, we're going to have to figure out a way to allow more pop-up shops, more flexible uses of spaces. If we get too prescriptive, it's already hard enough. I think we're going to have to figure out how to be flexible and let people survive. I mean, that's one of the benefits of a crisis, is that it allows you to take a step back and consider which rules are really necessary and which rules you want to try to be more flexible on. And I'm pushing, especially now, to be as flexible as we can with businesses, trying to figure out how to open, as long as they're opening safely and within the framework that we've allowed, that the state and the CDC sets up, because we obviously don't want to have any setbacks from a health point of view, but we do need to be way more flexible. Keith mentioned that he was disappointed there were no prescriptive solutions. We're an aging society. It'd be helpful to see some ideas on how to deal with it. Yeah, I mean, I think that is the knock against the book. But you can imagine you could have an entire book about just disaster recovery or aging or inequality. So hopefully this triggers all of us to go out and try to figure out new and prescriptive solutions. The governor, again, prior to COVID, but I think the work will continue, and is working on forming a new way to look at seniors in California and to redirect services there. And so that work is being looked at the state from a prescriptive level, and we're trying to follow that model and figure out how we fit in going forward. Is there anyone else who has any other questions or comments or observations? It's really, let me just say, I when I was invited, I wasn't sure how many people would want to come on and talk about an economics book in this time, and I really appreciate the tone and questions that everyone's been put forward. This is a pretty amazing place, and it's nice to connect with people instead of sitting in my house all day, taking calls and really hearing from you all and hearing your ideas. As always, please feel free to reach out to me in my through my county email. Let me know what you're hearing and seeing. You're my eyes and ears out there, and it's really helpful to know how our community is doing, especially now when we're sort of limited in our interactions.
Ryan, we really appreciate you sharing your Sunday with us. And it looks like there might be a couple more questions, so we can take a couple more, and if you have the time.
Yeah, I'm happy to take it. It looks like people are really appreciative as well. I think, as I said, Santa Cruz. The reason some people live here because of the natural beauty and the ability to go surfing or walking in the mountains. Other folks live here or live here as well because of the sense of community. And while we've been able to be outside, I think in some ways, more limited ways, that sense of community is really being challenged. And so I appreciate everyone here in the library taking this on. It's a really good idea.
Thank you. And we'll also, and thanks to everyone who has participated. We'll be posting this along with all of the programs that we do on our website. So you can continue to view this and share it with friends. And we hope that you do.
It looks like we have a question about the next book. I don't know if you have a next book lined up with any of my colleagues or peers, but
we're in the planning stages, and we'll post that soon. But I don't know if that question maybe was to you, if you're planning to author any more books.
Oh, sure. My next book. So actually, I mean, I'm actually trying to write a mystery. It's been totally blown up by this crisis and being on Zoom calls all day long. But someday I hope to get back to it. But I think the question that has really pushed me from this crisis is this idea of community resilience. I think we've all learned that we have to teach our children how to be resilient, and we have to teach our companies how to be resilient. I don't think we've done a good enough job in thinking about and how to be environmentally resilient. But I don't think we've done enough good job of thinking about what are the elements of community resilience and how do we really intentionally build those and nurture those and support those. Because I do think this pandemic is one, but we are facing constant disruption that is incredibly disruptive to our political systems, to our economic systems, to our livelihoods, causes people to react out of fear and anger. And the more that we can bind each other to each other, I think that's the opportunity. And I haven't been able to find a good book out there that tells me how communities have done that. So that's what I'm looking for. And if I can't find somebody else who's thought more deeply about it, I'm going to try to see what I can write about it.
That's great. And we'd love to have you back for that, or for any other book suggestions that you may have. And interestingly, as we mentioned before, one of the programs that we're in the planning stages of is called Community Resilience. So we hope to have you back for that one as well.
I'm happy to be back. Yeah, I do know a bookstore owner, and she lets me even this pandemic, she lets me wander around at night after the store's closed and look at all the books, and there are still so many good books to read. So I no doubt I'll be happy to read and talk about any one of those.
Great. Thank you again very much. Thanks to all of you for participating today.
Thank you.
Look forward to seeing you soon.
All right. Thank you.